The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden streaks over the rolling fields of what once was Michael Sullivan's proudest possession, his farm. He had inherited it from his father, who had spent decades working the land, pouring his sweat and soul into every crop, every fence post, every inch of soil. But now, all of that was slipping through his fingers. Debt, drought, and a cruel twist of fate had left him one signature away from losing everything. Michael stood on his front porch, his calloused hands gripping a letter that felt heavier than it should. The bank's final notice. He had exhausted every option: loans, selling equipment, cutting costs. Nothing was enough. The farm had seen better days, and so had he. His clothes were worn from years of labor, his face etched with lines far deeper than his 45 years should have allowed. His wife, Sarah, was inside, trying to stay strong for their 2 children. But Michael knew. She was just as scared as he was. He stepped off the porch, his boots crunching against the dry soil, and walked toward the barn. The old wooden structure had once stood tall with pride, but now it sagged under the weight of neglect. Inside, his only remaining horse, Duke, let out a tired snort. Michael ran a hand over the horse's mane, whispering, "I'm sorry, boy." I tried. He had sold most of his livestock to make ends meet, but it had barely made a dent. In 2 days, the bank would take everything. As he leaned against the wooden railing, the sound of an approaching car made him turn his head. It was a sleek black SUV, the kind that did not belong in a place like this. The tires kicked up dust as it rolled down the dirt path leading to his house. His heart pounded. He was not expecting visitors, and he had no energy left for another false promise from the bank or another neighbor offering condolences he did not need. The SUV came to a slow stop in front of his house, and before Michael could take a step forward, the back door opened. Out stepped a tall man, dressed in a crisp suit, his signature golden hair unmistakable even in the dimming light. Michael's breath caught in his throat. It was Donald Trump. For a moment, he thought he was seeing things. Why on earth would the former president, billionaire, and business tycoon be standing in front of his failing farm? But there he was, standing with the confidence of a man who had seen it all. This had to be a mistake. Michael swallowed hard as Trump took a few steps forward, his sharp eyes scanning the land before settling on him. "You must be Michael," Trump said, his voice as direct as ever. Michael nodded, still too stunned to speak. Trump extended a hand, and out of sheer instinct, Michael shook it. "I heard you're in trouble," Trump continued, glancing toward the fields, "and I do not like seeing good, hard-working Americans getting crushed like this." Michael's throat felt dry. He had seen Trump on TV, in headlines, but never imagined he would be standing right in front of him, and certainly not here, in the middle of nowhere. How do you know about me?" he finally managed to ask. Trump smirked slightly, glancing at the SUV. "Let's just say I know people who know people, and one of them told me about a farmer who was about to lose everything he worked for. That did not sit right with me." Michael ran a hand through his hair, still struggling to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of joke. No billionaire just showed up at a failing farm to offer help. There was always a catch. As if reading his thoughts, Trump folded his arms. "I'm not here to give you a handout, Michael," he said. "I am here to give you an opportunity." Michael's jaw clenched. "I have tried every opportunity there is," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "The banks do not care. The government sure as hell does not care. I am 2 days away from losing this farm, and unless you have a miracle in that SUV, there is nothing left to do." Trump nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Actually, I do have something," he said. He handed it to Michael, who hesitated before taking it. Unfolding the paper, Michael's eyes widened as he read. It was a contract, an offer, and at the bottom, Donald Trump's signature was already there. "This is a business deal," Trump said. "I am buying your land, not to take it away from you, but to invest in it. I want you to run it, Michael. Not for the banks, not for survival, but as a partner. Michael's breath hitched. He scanned the document again, expecting some hidden clause, some trick. But the terms were simple. Trump was offering him full funding to keep the farm, expand it, and turn it into something bigger. But why? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Trump signed, looking out over the land. Because I have seen too many hard-working Americans lose everything because of bad policies, greedy banks, and a system that does not care about the little guy. You are not lazy. You are not irresponsible. You just got dealt a bad hand. And I do not like seeing good people fail. Michael could not believe what he was hearing. This was not charity. It was a second chance. His hands trembled as he held the contract. "And what do you get out of this?" he asked, still trying to wrap his head around it. Trump smirked. "A good investment, and a damn good farmer making sure it succeeds." Michael felt his knees go weak. He had spent months preparing for the worst, convincing himself that failure was inevitable. And now, standing right in front of him, was a way out. A way to keep his father's legacy alive. A way to save his family. He looked up at Trump, who simply raised a brow. "So, Michael, what's it going to be? Are you going to let the banks take this place, or are we going to make a deal?" Michael did not need to think twice. He grabbed a pen from his pocket, took a deep breath, and signed his name. The moment the ink dried, something inside him shifted. For the first time in months, he had hope. Trump clapped him on the shoulder, a satisfied nod in his expression. "Good choice. Now let's get to work." And just like that, Michael's life changed forever. Michael Sullivan had spent months bracing for the worst, preparing himself for the inevitable loss of his family's farm. But now, with Donald Trump standing before him and a signed contract in his hands, everything has shifted. His mind struggled to keep up with what had just happened. One moment, he was a desperate man staring at the end of everything he had built. Next, he was a business partner of one of the most powerful men in the world. The wind picked up, rustling the dry fields around them as Trump glanced toward the land. "You've got good soil here," he said, hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored coat. "But you're playing a losing game with these banks. They do not care about farmers like you, Michael. They do not care about the land or the people working it. They just see numbers." Michael nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the contract. That was the truth he had been living for years. The banks had stripped him down, loan after loan, false promise after false promise, until he was drowning with no way out. He had spent sleepless nights wondering how to break the news to his wife, how to explain to his children that the only home they had ever known would soon belong to strangers. But now, there was a way forward. "So," Trump continued, "we are not just going to save this farm. We are going to build something bigger, something that will make those banks regret ever thinking they could push you out." Michael's throat was dry, and not just from the dust in the air. He had spent years fighting, and now someone was standing beside him, not offering charity, but a chance to fight back. He took a deep breath, glancing toward his farmhouse. "My wife," he said quietly. "She has no idea what's happening right now." Trump gave a small smirk. "Then let's not keep her waiting." They walked toward the house together, Trump moving with his usual confidence while Michael still felt like he was walking in a dream. When he pushed open the front door, he saw Sarah standing near the kitchen, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had been crying. He could tell by the redness in her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed when she saw him walk in, but her gaze shifted quickly when she noticed the man following behind him. Her lips parted, confusion flashing across her face. "Michael, who is that?" Michael hesitated for only a second before saying the words that still felt surreal. "Sarah, this is Donald Trump." She blinked, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Excuse me?" Trump stepped forward, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah," he said, his tone as smooth as ever. "I was just discussing business with your husband." Sarah's eyes flickered between them. She had been married to Michael long enough to know when something was off, and right now, she was trying to piece together the impossible. "Business?" she repeated, her voice tight with worry. "Michael, what's going on?" Michael turned to her, holding up the contract. "Sarah, we're not losing the farm." Her breath hitched. For months they had been drowning in fear, crushed by the weight of their reality. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Michael swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "Trump just bought the farm," he said carefully, "but not to take it from us. He's investing in it. In us. We're staying. We're expanding. We're getting a second chance." Sarah's hands covered her mouth as the reality of his words sank in. Her eyes welled with fresh tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. She turned toward Trump, searching for the catch, the hidden condition that would take this dream away as quickly as it had appeared. Trump simply met her gaze and shrugged. "I do not make bad investments, Sarah, and your husband. He's a good investment." Sarah let out a shaky breath and turned back to Michael. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Is this real?" Michael nodded, for the first time in months, feeling something he had nearly forgotten. Hope. Trump clapped his hands together, breaking the emotional weight in the room. "All right," he said, glancing between them. "We have a lot of work to do. I do not like wasting time, and we are going to turn this farm into something big. But first, we are going to make sure that the bank knows you are no longer on their list of victims." Michael frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Trump smirked. "Let's just say I do not like bullies. And banks? They have been bullying the American farmer for too damn long. We are about to remind them who they are dealing with." The next morning, Michael, Sarah, and Trump drove into town, the black SUV rolling to a slow stop in front of the local bank, the same one that had been pushing Michael toward foreclosure for months. The building loomed ahead, cold and lifeless, a place that had stolen the dreams of too many hard-working families just like his. But today things were different. As they stepped inside, heads turned immediately. Customers, bank employees, even the manager. Everyone recognized the man walking beside Michael. Murmurs filled the air, whispers spreading like wildfire as people realized Donald Trump was standing in their small-town bank. The bank manager, a gray-haired man named Richard Hale, stepped forward, adjusting his suit nervously. "Mr. Trump," he stammered, extending a hand. "This is quite the surprise." Trump ignored the handshake. "Richard, right?" Hale nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Trump motioned toward Michael. "Do you know this man?" Hale's gaze flickered toward Michael before nodding again. "Yes, of course. Mr. Sullivan has been a longtime client of the bank." Trump raised an eyebrow. "And yet, you were about to take his farm away." Hale shifted uncomfortably. I understand Mr. Sullivan's situation is unfortunate, but he signed agreements. There are policies in place and—" Trump held up a hand, stopping him. "Richard, let me save you some time. Michael Sullivan's debts, they are gone. The foreclosure, canceled. I bought his farm, and I will personally make sure this bank never touches it again." Hale's face paled. "Sir, that's a substantial amount." Trump smirked. "Oh, I know. And you are going to take that money and remember something. Banks do not own America. The people do. And if you ever try pulling something like this on another hard-working farmer, you'll be seeing me again." Hale swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. "Understood." Mr. Trump clapped him on the shoulder before turning back toward Michael. "Let's go. We've got a farm to build." As they stepped outside, the morning sun shone brightly over the small town. Michael took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off his chest. For the first time in a long time, the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to fight for. Trump glanced toward him, grinning. "Are you ready to show them what real American farmers can do?" Michael met his gaze, his own confidence returning. "Yeah," he said firmly. "Let's do this." And just like that, his story was no longer one of loss. It was one of victory. The drive back from town felt different. Michael Sullivan no longer carried the crushing weight of uncertainty on his shoulders. The farm that had been in his family for generations was no longer slipping through his fingers. It was his again. His debts were gone. The bank had been put in its place, and standing beside him was a man who had not only saved his land, but had given him a future he never thought possible: Donald Trump. As the black SUV pulled up in front of the house, Michael exhaled slowly, his fingers still gripping the contract that made everything official. He looked at Trump, who sat beside him, relaxed, yet always in control. The deal was done. The farm was secure. But now, the real work has begun. Sarah was already outside, waiting anxiously. The moment she saw the way Michael stepped out of the car, his posture lighter, his eyes filled with something she had not seen in months, she knew. She rushed forward, gripping his hands. "Is it real?" she whispered. Michael nodded. "It's real." A choked laugh escaped her lips as relief crashed over her. They had fought for so long, held on when there was nothing left to hold on to. And now, they have won. She turned to Trump, blinking away tears. "I don't even know what to say." Trump smiled. "Then don't. Just get ready, because we have work to do." Michael frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Trump motioned toward the land stretching beyond them. "You don't think I came here just to save the farm, do you? I came to build something bigger. This is not about keeping what you had. It's about making it better." Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah before turning back to him. "I don't understand." Trump stepped forward, gesturing across the fields. "This land has potential. You've been struggling because the system is designed to keep farmers like you barely surviving. We are going to change that. You are not just going to farm, you are going to expand. We are turning this place into a high-profit, self-sustaining agricultural powerhouse." Michael's brows furrowed. He had spent years in survival mode. He had never even allowed himself to dream of something like that. "Expand?" Trump smirked. "That's right. We are going to modernize your farm, increase production, and make sure you are not just scraping by, but thriving." Michael felt his pulse quicken. "How?" Trump turned, motioning toward his SUV. "Let's take a drive." Minutes later, they were moving down the dirt roads that cut through Michael's land. Trump leaned forward slightly, taking in the scenery. "First, we are bringing in the best technology. Automated irrigation, high-yield crops, better livestock management. Everything you need to make more money with less struggle." Michael listened, still trying to absorb what was happening. He had spent years watching his equipment break down, his land suffer under unpredictable weather, his profits dwindle due to poor market conditions. He had fought tooth and nail just to survive, and now Trump was offering him something he had never dared to hope for: prosperity. As they reached an open field, Trump motioned for the driver to stop. He turned to Michael. "How many people do you employ?" Michael sighed. "Right now? Just a couple of farmhands. I had to let most of them go when things got bad." Trump nodded. "That's going to change. We are bringing jobs back. Your farm is going to employ locals. You are not just going to save your family, you are going to save this entire community." Michael swallowed hard. It was overwhelming. His entire life he had been told to accept limitations. That farming was hard. That struggle was inevitable. But now, Trump was telling him something different, that he could do more, that he could be more. "I don't even know where to start," Michael admitted. Trump patted his shoulder. "That's why I am here. We start today." The next morning, everything changed. Trucks arrived carrying state-of-the-art farming equipment. High-tech tractors, irrigation systems, and solar-powered machinery rolled onto the property. Michael could hardly believe what he was seeing. It was a level of advancement he never imagined he'd have access to. A team of experts sent by Trump's business connections walked the fields, analyzing soil, assessing crop rotation strategies, and laying out plans for expansion. For the first time, Michael was not working alone. Sarah stood on the porch, watching as the transformation unfolded. She turned to Trump, still in disbelief. "You really meant it, didn't you? You're not just saving our farm, you're changing everything." Trump smiled. "Sarah, I don't do anything halfway." Michael stood nearby, watching as his land, his father's land, his grandfather's land, was brought back to life in a way he never thought possible. For years he had felt like he was losing a battle he could not win, but now he had resources, support, and a plan for something bigger. As he walked toward Trump, he finally said the words that had been sitting in his chest since the moment this all began. "Why me?" Trump turned, his expression unreadable. "Because you are like millions of hardworking people who built this country. People who have been ignored, pushed aside, and told to accept failure. I do not like seeing good people lose." Michael nodded, feeling an unfamiliar emotion rise in him. Pride, not just in his farm, but in himself. Trump glanced at the workers assembling new irrigation systems. "This farm, it is just the beginning. We are setting an example. The media is going to hear about this, and when they do, they are going to see what happens when you bet on the American farmer instead of the banks." Michael let out a small chuckle. "You always have a bigger picture in mind, don't you?" Trump smirked. "Always." As the sun began to set over the newly revived farm, Michael realized something. For the first time in his life, he was not just fighting to survive, he was fighting to win. Michael Sullivan sat on his porch, staring out at the fields that had once felt like his biggest burden. Now, they were something else entirely. Just a few weeks ago, he had been preparing to say goodbye to everything his family had built. Now his land was being transformed before his eyes. The sound of new machinery echoed across the farm as workers installed the latest irrigation systems, something he had only dreamed about before. Trucks rolled in, carrying supplies and technology that promised to make his farm more efficient than it had ever been. He had spent years fighting just to keep the land afloat. And now, in what felt like an instant, everything had changed. Donald Trump stood nearby, watching the progress with a sharp, assessing gaze. He had been in complete control of every moment since he arrived, as if he had already mapped out every step before Michael even knew what was happening. There was something unnerving about it, but also something reassuring. Trump was not the kind of man who did things halfway. If he said this farm was going to succeed, it would. Michael took a deep breath, still trying to process everything that had happened. He had spent so much time believing that failure was inevitable. Now, he was standing in the middle of a success story he never saw coming. Workers moved across the fields, each one part of the carefully planned operation Trump had set in motion. Some were setting up automated watering systems, others were marking off areas for new crops, and a team of analysts was reviewing soil data to ensure they planted the right crops for maximum yield. It was efficient, calculated, and completely foreign to the way Michael had run things before. He had always worked with instinct, doing what he thought was best based on experience, but this was different. This was precision. Trump turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Do you know what your biggest problem was before all this?" he asked. Michael exhaled, shaking his head. "Everything?" Trump smirked. "Not everything. You worked hard, but you were playing defense. Always reacting, always trying to hold on. That's how they want you to live. Just barely making it. But we don't do that. We play offense. We take control." Michael nodded slowly, letting the words settle. He had never thought about it that way, but Trump was right. He had spent years being at the mercy of things beyond his control, the banks, the weather, the market. But now, for the first time, he felt like he had a say in his own future. He was not just holding on anymore. He was building something. A convoy of cars pulled up to the farm, kicking up dust as they came to a stop. Michael frowned, watching as people stepped out, some carrying cameras, others wearing suits. It took him a moment to realize what was happening. The media had arrived. He turned to Trump, who seemed completely unfazed. "You didn't think we were going to do all this quietly, did you?" Trump said, amusement flickering in his eyes. "This is bigger than just you, Michael. People need to see this." Michael's stomach tightened. He had never wanted attention. He had just wanted to keep his farm. But now, whether he liked it or not, the world was watching. The reporters set up quickly, cameras flashing as they took in the sight of Trump standing in front of a once failing farm that was now on the path to becoming something far greater. Trump stepped forward, addressing the cameras with his usual confidence. America was built by men like Michael Sullivan, hard-working people who take care of the land, who feed this country. And what does the system do to them? It crushes them. It forces them into debt, takes away their land, and tells them they don't matter. Well, guess what? They do matter. And this farm is proof that when you invest in the right people, they don't just survive, they thrive. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing as Trump continued. This is just the beginning. This farm isn't just going to be successful, it's going to be an example, a symbol of what happens when you stop listening to the people who tell you you can't win and start fighting for what's yours. Michael listened, his heart pounding. He had spent so much time just trying to get by, just trying to make it to the next season. Now his farm was a symbol. His story was part of something much bigger than himself. A reporter turned to him, microphone extended. "Mr. Sullivan, what does this mean for you?" Michael hesitated. He had never been the kind of man who liked speaking in front of crowds, let alone cameras. But as he looked at the faces around him, the workers in the fields, his wife standing on the porch, his children watching from the window, he knew he had to say something. He took a deep breath. "A month ago, I thought I had lost everything. I thought I was going to have to walk away from the land my father worked, the land his father worked. But today I'm standing here not as a man who lost, but as a man who fought back. And I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for every farmer out there who's been told they don't matter. Because we do." The crowd erupted into applause. Michael felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something else. Pride. Not just on his farm, but in himself. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his voice mattered. Trump clapped him on the back, nodding approvingly. "That," he said, "is how you make an impact." As the sun began to set over the newly revived farm, Michael sat on the porch, watching the workers wrap up for the day. The land that had once felt like a weight around his neck now felt like a new beginning. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting on his. "I still can't believe this is happening," she whispered. Michael chuckled. "Me neither." Trump stepped onto the porch, his gaze scanning the fields. "You did good today," he said. Michael turned to him, his expression serious. "What's next?" Trump smirked. Now we take this national." Michael's heart pounded. This was just the beginning, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready for whatever came next. Michael woke up before dawn, the way he always had, but this morning felt different. For the first time in years, he was waking up without the crushing weight of uncertainty pressing down on his chest. He pulled on his boots, stepping outside to find the farm buzzing with life even at this early hour. Workers were already moving, new equipment was lined up neatly in the barn, and the first shipment of upgraded supplies had arrived. It was happening. The transformation of his farm was no longer just an idea. It was real. Donald Trump stood near the fence line, speaking with one of the project managers overseeing the operation. Even in the soft morning light, his presence carried an energy that commanded attention. He turned when he saw Michael approaching, a knowing look in his eyes. "You ready to make history?" he asked. Michael exhaled, glancing around at the land he had nearly lost. "I don't think I've ever been this ready." Trump nodded approvingly before motioning toward a group of workers assembling what looked like a mobile command station. "We're launching Phase 2 today. The expansion isn't just about your farm anymore. We're setting up a system that other farmers can follow. You're going to be the model for a new kind of agricultural success." Michael blinked. "Wait, what?" Trump smirked. "You didn't think I was just going to fix one farm, did you? We're scaling this. What we're doing here, we're going to do for farmers across the country, and you're going to be at the center of it." Michael had no words. Just weeks ago, he was drowning in debt, preparing to lose everything. Now, not only was his farm thriving, but Trump was making it the blueprint for something even bigger. The thought both excited and terrified him. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Experts arrived to finalize the crop selection for the new high-yield planting strategy. A logistics team from Trump's network analyzed distribution routes, ensuring that Michael's farm would no longer be at the mercy of middlemen who took the lion's share of profits. It was a level of business planning Michael had never been exposed to before, but he listened, learned, and adapted. By midday, a convoy of trucks arrived, delivering the final pieces of infrastructure that would allow Michael to scale his operation. Silos for grain storage, solar panels to reduce energy costs, and even a processing facility that would allow him to package and sell his crops directly instead of relying on wholesalers. Sarah watched from the porch, holding a cup of coffee, still trying to comprehend the speed at which their lives had changed. She turned to Michael as he passed. "Do you even recognize this place anymore?" Michael stopped, taking a long look at everything. "For the first time, I actually like what I see." That afternoon, Trump called a meeting in the newly built operations center. A handful of other struggling farmers from the region had been invited, all of them sitting in quiet disbelief as they listened to what was happening. Some had already sold off large portions of their land, others were on the brink of foreclosure just like Michael had been. But now, they were being given a different option. Trump stood at the front of the room, laying out the plan in a way that only he could. "You all know how this works. The system is designed to keep you desperate. The banks loan you money with high interest, the supply chains dictate your prices, and when times get tough, they take everything. That's not happening anymore. We're cutting out the middlemen, modernizing operations, and making sure farmers like you are in control of your own futures. This is how we take back American agriculture." The room was silent for a moment, then one of the farmers, an older man named Bill, spoke up. "This sounds great, but how do we trust it? People have made promises before." Trump smirked. "You think I like losing? This isn't a promise. This is a strategy. And I don't lose." Michael glanced around the room, watching as skeptical faces slowly shifted into something else. Hope. As the sun set over the farm, Michael stood with Trump by the fence, watching the final shipments being unloaded. "You know," Michael said, "a few weeks ago I thought my biggest victory would be just keeping this place. Now, I feel like I'm part of something a whole lot bigger." Trump nodded. "You are. This isn't just about one farm, Michael. It's about proving that the American farmer doesn't have to lose. They just need the right support. And that's exactly what we're going to give them." Michael looked out at his land, his family, and the people who had come to be part of something greater than themselves. For the first time in his life, he was not just a farmer. He was a leader. Michael Sullivan stood at the edge of his farm, watching the final pieces of the transformation fall into place. Just weeks ago, he had been standing in the same spot, convinced that this land, his family's legacy, was slipping away forever. But today, the sight before him was something he never could have imagined. The fields were thriving, the machinery was running like clockwork, and his farm had gone from a struggling operation to a model of success. He had spent years believing that farming was a slow, uphill battle against forces beyond his control. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was on the winning side. Donald Trump stood next to him, arms crossed as he observed the progress. There was an undeniable energy in the air, a feeling that this was only the beginning. He had taken a small-town farmer, crushed by debt and an unfair system, and turned him into something more, a symbol of resilience, of taking control, of proving that the American farmer did not have to be a casualty of corporate greed and government negligence. Trump had always been known for building things, for making deals, but this was something different. This was personal. The media had latched onto the story, turning Michael's farm into a national headline. Reporters from major networks had flooded in, trying to understand why a billionaire businessman had taken an interest in a struggling farmer. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others said it was just another investment. But those who came to the farm who spoke to Michael and saw the transformation with their own eyes, knew the truth. This was not just about one man's land. This was about proving that the system did not have to win. Farmers from surrounding areas had started showing up, asking questions, wanting to know if they could do the same. Some were skeptical, beaten down by years of failure, convinced that no amount of change could reverse what had already been done. But others saw hope. They saw what had happened to Michael and wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for them too. Michael had spent so much time just trying to survive that he had never considered the possibility of truly succeeding. He had grown up believing that hard work meant scraping by, that farming was a life of struggle. But now, with everything around him changing so rapidly, he started to wonder. What if success was not just for the lucky ones? What if it was for people like him too? Trump turned to Michael, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "You see it now, don't you?" Michael exhaled, shaking his head with a chuckle. "Yeah, I see it." Trump nodded. "This farm isn't just a farm anymore. It's proof. It's proof that when you invest in the right people, when you stop letting the system push you down, you don't just survive, you thrive." Michael looked around, taking it all in. The land that had once felt like a burden was now an opportunity. The fields that had once been dry and empty were now full of life. The farmhands who had once feared for their jobs were now part of something bigger. And Michael? He was not just a farmer anymore. He was a leader. As the evening set in, another convoy of cars arrived. Businessmen, agricultural experts, even politicians had started taking notice. Some wanted to partner, to be part of whatever was happening here. Others wanted to challenge it, unwilling to accept that the game was changing. Michael found himself in meeting after meeting, discussing expansion, production, and logistics in ways he never had before. He learned about market strategies, direct-to-consumer sales, and methods to ensure that small farmers were not left at the mercy of middlemen and corporate giants. The more he learned, the more he realized just how much he had been kept in the dark. For years, he had believed that his struggles were his fault, that he had failed because he had not worked hard enough, that he had not made the right decisions. But now he saw the truth. The system was designed to keep farmers like him small, to keep them desperate, to keep them reliant on banks and corporations that did not care if they thrived or failed. That realization hit him harder than anything else. How many other farmers had spent their lives thinking they were the problem when, in reality, the game had been rigged against them from the start? One night, as Michael walked the fields, he spotted one of the younger farmhands, Josh, a 19-year-old who had been working on the farm since he was a kid, standing near the newly installed solar panels, looking out over the land. Michael approached him, sensing something on the young man's mind. "You all right, Josh?" he asked. Josh turned, eyes filled with something between awe and disbelief. I never thought I'd see anything like this," he admitted. "I always thought farms were supposed to struggle. That's just how it was." Michael exhaled, placing a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "That's what they wanted us to believe. But that's not how it has to be." Josh nodded slowly. "It's kind of crazy, huh? That it took all this to make us realize we've been getting screwed for years." Michael chuckled. "Yeah, but now we're doing something about it." Trump had been right. This was bigger than one farm. It was bigger than one man. It was about rewriting the rules, about proving that people like Michael, hardworking, dedicated, salt-of-the-earth people, deserved to succeed just as much as the men in suits sitting in corporate offices making decisions about their lives. One morning, a group of reporters returned for an exclusive interview. Michael sat across from them, no longer the broken man he had been just weeks ago, but a confident, determined leader. "So, Michael," one of the reporters asked, "if you had one thing to say to other farmers out there who are struggling like you were, what would it be?" Michael thought for a moment before answering. "I'd tell them that they're not alone, that they're not failures, that they've been lied to for a long time about what success is supposed to look like. But I'd also tell them this: you don't have to lose. You don't have to accept what they tell you. You can fight back, you can take control. But you have to be willing to break out of the mindset they've put us in for generations. You have to start thinking bigger, because if you do, you'll realize something. We were never supposed to fail. We were just never given the tools to win. Until now. Trump, standing nearby, gave Michael a nod of approval. "Now that," he said, "is how you start a movement." Michael looked out at his farm, at his family, at the people who had gathered to be part of something greater than themselves. For the first time in his life, he was not just a farmer. He was a force to be reckoned with. Michael's story is not just about one farmer. It's about every hard-working person who has ever been told they cannot win. It's about the people who work day and night, sacrificing everything, only to be left behind by a system that does not care. But here is the truth. You are not powerless. You are not alone, and you do not have to accept failure. What happened on Michael's farm proves one thing. When you have the right knowledge, the right support, and the right mindset, you do not just survive, you succeed. So ask yourself, what is holding you back? What have you been told is impossible? Maybe it is time to stop playing by their rules. Maybe it is time to start playing to win. If this story inspired you, share it. Because the more people know that change is possible, the harder it will be for the system to keep them down. Your story is still being written. Make sure it is one worth telling.